Hello, everybody. How are you doing? So, we're going to get our witchery on today, right? The practical applications of some of this stuff. And so, today's video is a little on the long side. So, I'm going to apologize for that first off. But this is a really, really, really good book for you to get if you want to go deep into Graeco-Egyptian magic. And one of the things that Dr. Skinner does in this is he goes through absolutely everything when it comes to the things in relation to the PGM, which is the Greek demotic text in their translation, the Egyptian Book of Magic, right? So this thing, fantastic stuff. The relationship between the mysteries and magic that he says in chapter 1, section 2, is the audience, right? The first category is religion, that deals with the gods on behalf of the congregation. The second, the mysteries, takes a select few of the congregation and exposes them to experiences by which all accounts change their view of the world and their life forever after. The significance of this change can be measured by the very small number of initiates who have ever broken their vows and written down an account of their experience. Right. And so the experience that we're doing with the system that I've got going is there is the general spell of the day program. And then there is the grimoire tradition that I've got, which teaches the rite of transformation. Right. And that's the life change that I deal with my things in relation to Greek magic. Right. It's the same kind of concepts where the individual becomes the node of power instead of just a interactive force with it. So that by your interactions with the divine and with the gods and with what have you, you come to a deeper application of you're the one in the driver's seat. You're the one in control of these things. And so the third category will often be performed for just one client or just the benefit of the magician himself, right? And so this is carrying on a discussion that I had earlier today, which there's three applications of it. There's the people that will never do magic, that just want to have the benefits from it, so they see client work. There's the people that want to study it and apply it for themselves. And then there's the people that do it for others, that are good enough at what they do to be able to ensure that there will be a manifestation of a type that will match the description. The ideology and the narrative to make it exactly what the client wants becomes a thing of nuance, because there's what the client wants and what the spirits permit. If you use spirits, if you use the dead, if you do these sorts of things. So he goes on to say that the degree of secrecy, religion embraces all comers, and in many cases seeks to convert the non-believer or adherent of a rival religion to join its services. The mysteries selected or accepted only a few individuals from the congregation who looked for or paid for a specific spiritual experience. Magic was ever more secretive and in most cases actively discouraged new postulants or practitioners. Clients were only included in the practice on a need-to-know or discipleship basis. And so again, this comes to who needs it, who wants it, and why are they coming for it, right? The degree of specificity in objectives. Religion dealt with the general good and assisted the various rites of passage, such as birth, death, and marriage. But the objectives will be general in nature, such as blessing, baptism for birth, baptism for marriage, the last rites for death. The mysteries focused on the initiation or introduction to the god or gods of a few candidates at a personal experiential level, and usually dealt with just one god, such as Dionysus or Demeter, with a single objective of initiation or immortalization. The prime objective of the immortality offered by the mysteries should not be confused with a place in heaven offered by religion. Magic operates with a very specific end or a specific objective, but drawn from a wide field of very concrete possibilities: love, lust, money, power, etc. The range of entities encountered. Religion deals with the gods, angels, and saints. The mysteries dealt with one specific god or goddess. Magic deals with the whole range of spiritual creatures: gods, angels, daemons, demons, elementals, spirits, and even the dead. And so when we go through this, we have to think, what is it that we're up to? Privacy. The nature of the three practices can be summed up in terms of degree of privacy. Religion is practiced in public in temples in front of all adherents by the priests. The mysteries were celebrated in private by the priests only for the benefit of one or a very small number of initiates. It is very clearly different from religion, which has been practiced openly in the temples. And magic is celebrated in private and or secretly, and it was sometimes practiced by the priests of a religion, but also by lay persons with the right training. Okay, so there again, it becomes the right training. What is the right training? Well, that means you go through all the books, you go through all the rituals, you get taught on all the things that the books don't say, and that's the thing about the books is they only encompass the stuff that needs to be written down, the stuff that should be automatic practice, depending on what is your energy work, depending on what is your development, what is your need for these things. The subject and the object. Another possible way of looking at these three categories is in terms of subject and object. Religion, the priest presents the god to the people. The mysteries, the priest presents the specific candidate to a specific god. And the magic, the magician presents himself to and adjures the god or the other supernatural spiritual creatures. If these definitions are applied, it becomes a lot easier to identify when a particular practice pertains to religion, mystery, or magic. To understand the magic of the PGM, it is useful to remember that all three modes of communication with the spiritual existed side by side at the time when magic was considered a worthy and workable practice, and the mysteries were still highly valued and flourishing. According to Skinner, it is my belief that it is precisely because of the monotheistic Judeo-Christian bias and because of the missing modern experiences of mystery religions that the discussion in the relationship between magic and religion has not, in modern times, ever reached a satisfactory conclusion. By cutting out the middle term, the mysteries, Christianity forever polarized magic and religion instead of seeing it as part of a natural continuum of man's efforts to relate to the gods and other spiritual creatures. And so that concludes on page 25. And anthropological interpretations. That the lessons of anthropology, grown familiar and common, it is commonplace, accepts the impossibility of separating magic from religion. But the thing is, with the techniques of Graeco-Egyptian magic, you're going in depth with this. You're going into the different audiences of the different types of objectives for each of the different works, right? And he goes into the historical background, which is absolutely fantastic. So I would definitely recommend reading that section. What I'm going to talk to you about is the separation of magic and its separate parts. So what does that mean? What do I mean by that? I mean that there are, where does that section go? Here we go. The application of story and the narrative, right? So on page 105, the procedure of reciting an abridged version of the myths associated with a god being invoked or commemorating their deeds is a well-established practice in both religion and in magic. One of the quotes he makes is from an author named Brashear. The idea that mythical events retain their supernatural forces forever can be reactivated at any given time by the simple act of recounting them isn't a technique common to all times and places. The precedent having been cited, the god is obliged to act the same way now as then, this time to the benefit of the conjurer. Even the simple allusion to the deeds done in the past will suffice to incite a god to action. The same thought is implicit in the magician identifying himself with a certain deity. Having once been in the same situation as the person for whom the rite is performed, the god is induced to act in a way favorable to the magician. And so this is one of the primary facets of the magician becoming the priest god of that moment, right? How do you relate to the deity, and how does the deity relate to you in that situation when you're going to call one, or the spirit, or the situation, right? What factors do you have to have in your existence that will allow you to understand the defeat of a dragon, so to speak, or the interaction with the gods, or the interaction with spirits, or the giants, or any of the mythos? What have you done to experience those sorts of things? How have you given yourself to yourself so that you can embody your higher spirit? So here's one of those things where you can cross-reference it through Christianity, right? God did extraordinary miracles through Paul so that when the handkerchief or aprons that had touched his skin were brought to the sick, their diseases left them and the evil spirits came out of them. Then some itinerant Jewish exorcists tried to use the name of Lord Jesus over those who had been possessed by evil spirits, saying, "I adjure you by Jesus whom Paul proclaims." 7 sons of a Jewish high priest named Sceva were doing this. But the evil spirit said to them in reply, "Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you?" Then the man with the evil spirit leapt on them, mastered them all, and so overpowered them, and they fled out of the house naked and wounded. So this is one of those things where apostolic transmission comes into requirement. You get more than just training and wisdom when you go through rituals of the church. There is a laying on of hands of power. So when you're doing this, when you are completing these things, you have to think for yourself, okay, well, what is it that I'm going to do that's going to bring this sort of thing into viable use for me, right? Well, if I'm conjuring power in Jesus's name, what authority do I have by which to do that, right? And so that's the thing that you have to think about if you're going to try to use religion-based conjurations, right? You can set up this story, the narrative, with the mythical events, right? But you cannot use the holy names unless you have earned the right to use the holy names and you have gone before the gods, before the demons, before the devils, before whatever it is that you need to do. There is preparations that you have to make before you are eligible to use those conjurations. Now, in the Grimoire of Arts, I talk about the path of the watchtowers, right? It is the projection of your spirit through pathworking, through becoming attuned to your mysteries. Is the individual is in containment of an infinite amount of universes within themselves. And so by using the Grimoire in that tradition, you're able to earn your place in the hierarchy, right, of spirits, of creation, of whatever it is that you need to do based on the interactions of the spirits that you meet. And so the point is to summon up spirits or dismiss them within that authority. So if you're a priest and you have the God-given embodiment to be able to lay hands on and purge evil because you have taken up holy orders, congratulations. This does not apply to you. If you have undergone training to become energetically capable of interacting with the celestial forces on the celestial planes in like-to-like manner as the spirits, then this is not for you. This is for those people that are seeking to develop those contacts, seeking to use that so that way it becomes a one-to-one. You work the same energy, the same way, in the same capacity as the spirits do. All right, well, how do you do that? Well, you have to embody your spirit before you die. And how do you do that? I've gone through secret rituals that I can't talk about. I've gone through rituals that I can talk about. The ones that I can talk about provided the power in which is the unification of the spirit and the body and the pranic flow. So there's the mind and then there's the spirit. The mind is the behavior the body will endure based on the conditions in which it is experiencing life. The spirit is the behavior that actually pushes the mind to action in relation to the things that are going on. So the body and the mind are separate. The spirit and the mind are separate, right? It is the unification of the mind and the spirit while you're alive that allows you access to your spiritual nervous system, right? So that would be your chi, your ki, your prana, your kundalini, your whatever word you want to talk about. There is the magic and the necromancy of your spirit, or the necromagia, the spirit magic, the dead magic, the things that are not entwined in flesh, right? Anima versus physical magnetism, right? So in the 1800s, they were talking about prana, which was a new to the Western concept. So they were trying to figure it out. They called it pneumia, right? The magnetism of the body, or the spirit body, that they were able to use in the West, but it wasn't a fully formed concept of prana and where it came from inside the body as it was in the East, right? And so as people were interacting with India, as all of that shit was going down, you have the interactions between those. But with the Greek magic, it was lineage based. It was, if you didn't have these things to interact with the spirits or the gods or going before the gods, you should not be doing them, right? This is why most magicians at the time were also priests. They say the religion is the home to failed magicians. I disagree. I say some of the most skilled magicians I know are priests. But at the same time, there's the priest that will do the rites for the congregation in public. And then there are the priests that will do the work for the client that comes to them after. Excuse me. So when we are doing this, we have to think, what are the different types of operations? So on page 159, he goes into imprecise terminology has been an impediment to the serious studies of textual amulets. Modern scholarship has used different terms to signify textual amulets and has applied them inconsistently. Okay, and so that is one of the quotes, and this is true. Modern terminology for magic, the occult, and what have you, is crap because there are so many people thinking that one thing is the same as the other. It isn't. And when we go back to look at the original definitions or the original applications of it, a rite is the term that covers any ritual or magical procedure, right? According to Skinner, I have therefore often preferred rite to spell, though both terms are very general. So rites contain ritual elements and a spell element. They are the union of both. So if you're doing a ritual for something, it's something you do over and over and over again because it works. Like brushing your teeth, combing your hair, taking a shower. Those are rituals, right? Those are cleansing rituals, right? Your spell, right? What is it you're doing is the date that you go on, right? You do your cleansing ritual, and then if you're going to get all dressed and pretty and you're going to go out on a date, that would be the spell, right? Is your preparation for that event, is a specific thing you're trying to do, right? The term spell is the least precise term and will seldom be used. But where it is simply used refers to the technique practiced by a magician involving verbal invocation. Often the word logos has been translated as spell or prayer, although logos has many different meanings which extend over a number of pages in standard Greek lexicons. It is meaning which comes closest to the sense of the terms in the PGM, which is an invocation. Okay? A charm. The word charm is also very nonspecific, and it is a term therefore not very useful when it's considered in detailed magical techniques. Charm may be used as a verb It is derived from the Latin carmen, meaning song or invocation. It can also have a vocal dimension as well as inducing the written form of such a song. It is sometimes applied to a small item designed to be worn or to bring luck, where amulet might be more appropriate. Charm is therefore too general and too imprecise a word for the present purposes. Unfortunately, some PGM translators have used the blanket term quite often, where a much more specific technical term like phylactery or summoning statue occurs in the Greek. This term will therefore be used as little as possible in Skinner's work. An amulet simply means a thing worn on the person to attract luck or protect the wearer from evil influences, danger, or illness, generally. Syllogism quoted by Budge, the E.A. Wallace Budge, from the guy that did one of the translations for the Egyptian Book of the Dead, was of the opinion that an amulet was derived from the Old Latin amuletum, meaning means of defense. Schemer may be closer to the truth when he states amulet is derived from the Latin amuletum, which traces back to the Arabic hamulet, meaning an object worn on the body, especially around the neck, as a preservative against a host of afflictions. So, a means of defense, yes, but a preservative is a more accurate way to think about it. An amulet may be in the form of a gem, especially an engraved gem, a coin, a pendant, a ring, or plant or animal part like a rabbit's foot, or it may be a textual amulet. A typical Mediterranean example of a mass-produced amulet which is still current is the blue circular eye-shaped amulet designed to protect the wearer from the evil eye. Ancient Egyptian amulets were also mass-produced using certain standard formats such as the scarab, perhaps the most popular form, the ankh, the tayet, the jed pillar, the abhart, or the wedget eye of Horus. Right? One key distinguishing feature of an amulet is that it's made for a client, either mass-produced, with maybe the later insertion of the client's name, or specifically made for a very specific client. In the context of the PGM amulets, they're primarily made by the magicians for his clients, as to witness the large number of examples which incorporate specific names. Okay, and then we get into a little bit more of the specifics. A tawiz. In modern India and Middle East, the wearing of a small metal, often gold cylinder with an enclosed religious text for the protection is quite widespread. These also occurred in ancient Egypt. Although these items are sometimes referred to as phylacteries, they function like amulets, but they do not occur in the PGM. The usual word for these in Urdu and Arabic is tawiz or tabriz. The tawiz, Taweez, will be worn every day, and it must contain a religious, not magical text. So it would be like the clippings of the Quran, or an excerpt of the Quran, or the Torah in an amulet that you wear in a golden cylinder around your neck. It's to keep you and the thing, you encased within the thing, right? A phylactery is a term that is always for the use of the magician and only during the rite, and not worn on a day-to-day basis. It will also definitely not incorporate his name. A phylactery is worn, but it must only be used by him during a rite. This term will only be used in a book, in this book anyway, the same way it's used in the PGM. The difference between an amulet and a phylactery thus is highlighted by both its usage and the user. The amulet is made for a client, but the phylactery is made by the magician for the magician. Phylacteries, almost without exception, form part of a larger rite and are always detailed in a subsection at the end of the rite. Phylacteries, U and U2 in the PGM, are always described as phylacterion. Another reason why these distinctions need to be clearly made is that the amulets made for a client later merge with folk magic, while phylacteries, talismans, and layman's always remained part of learned magic for solely by the magician himself. So in this case, the difference between an amulet that you give to a client or that you make for a client is specific to that client, but the phylactery is the seal of Solomon that you wear yourself if you're going to be doing those types of magics. Mine is the one that's behind me, right? The 8-point star with the labradorite, the gold, the silver, and the copper, right? It's a 3-metal thing. And so those are specific things, right? It's a once-off. That was a one-of-a-kind piece, right? So that would be, and if I was to inscribe the labradorite with seals or what have you, it would then become an amulet and not become a phylactery. Like that becomes a general purpose part of the regalia, right? That becomes part of the amulet of power, the thing that you're going to do. Now, the tefillin, Tefillin, phylacteries are defined in most dictionaries as associated with Jewish religious practices. The author Kotansky points out that the less precise use of phylactery in scholarly literature pinpoints the difference between the tefillin. He also traces the probable origin of this confusion to the Gospel of Matthew. These inscribed magical amulets, or lamellae, are referred to as phylacteries in the scholarly literature. The main drawback in using this term is that the phylactery is easily confused with modern parlance with the traditional Jewish tefillin, carrying Bible verses worn as frontlets by pious Jews since ancient times. So again, goes back to the tawiz, which is the little gold tube that has the sacred name stuffed inside, whereas the phylactery does not have the sacred names, but it is used in ritual practice, right? And so in Jewish tradition, a more massive version of the phylactery was used by the high priests, such as this documented in the Bible. In light of the later use of the phylactery, it seems that the high priest wore the breastplate. So the breastplate of Solomon, the 12 stones for the tribes of Egypt, that is a phylactery. It's the stones. It is without needing to be carved, without needing to be identified specifically. These are the phylactery versus the amulet versus the tefillin and versus the tawiz. All right. The layman is the magician's phylactery, and it is the most specific term. It is possible that the layman derives from lamne, which is translated lamella in scholarly works, but the two should not be confused. In medieval and later magical texts, the phylacterium was often rendered as layman, and layman is always the technical sense of something worn solely by a magician for protection from the entities he evoked, specifically from the time of the ritual. The layman of the medieval magician is a direct descendant of the PGM phylactery. At no point was the word layman used in a sense of general amulet or used in context outside of ritual magic. Interestingly, the layman often became a double or double-sided piece of parchment bearing a sigil of the spirit being evoked on the recto and that of the thwarting angel, understood to be controlling the spirit, on the verso. So on the back and on the front, right? Depending on what it is you're doing. The consecration of such a layman or breastplate was considered of importance of both priest and the magician. Right? You shall perform all of these procedures in the fear of God, protect yourself from any bad thing. And when you perform all of these procedures, you should go forth to the water, though you may say many prayers and supplications and ask that you not fail again. Then speak the glorious name in fear and trembling and see the image of the lion of fire in the trough. You know that you have succeeded in wearing the holy name. Then you shall take the golden plate on which this holy name is engraved, and tie it around your neck and on your heart, and take care not to become impure again when it is upon you, lest be punished. Then you may do any magical thing and you will succeed. Right? So that's a fragment of Jewish magic, and you would use that for a scrying bowl or some such like that. Now, a talisman, although the word is commonly used and interchangeable with amulet, it will be here used in a more restricted grimoire sense. And it implies something created with a magical rite or specific intention. A talisman is not personalized and not often worn. A talisman is something written or drawn with a specific magical objective in mind, often planetary. Unlike amulet or phylactery, it is not designed for personal or general protection, but to do something positive. In the context of the PGM, stele probably comes closest to the meaning of the talisman, and Stroud makes the distinction very clearly. Amulets are protective charms. They fend off evil. They are passive objects, and although they can absorb or deflect all manner of dangerous magic, they cannot be actively controlled by their owner, and thus they are opposite of talismans, which have active magical powers that can be used to their owner's discretion, right? So you can call forth the magic from a talisman, whereas an amulet, it's hit or miss. Right? And so the amulets of the planetary associations in the books of Moses or the keys of Solomon, right? those function in different ways. You have the general amulet of the planetary intelligences of the spirits of Venus, Mars, all those, right? And in my work in the Rite of Transformation, I use the first talisman of every planet, right? But if you want to get really, really, really myopic with it, what you should do is you should dig out the seals of the planets, and the seal of the planet of your birth date, the numbers 1 through what have you, right? Like what is the planet of the day of your birth, right? The seven planets. So you would use that talisman, the 7th planet or the 6th planet or whatever it is, and you would inscribe that into the black candle. And then you would use the spirit or the seal of the planet from Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, or technically it's from Francis Barrett's The Megas, as he incorporates those seals of the planet through which the spirit or the intelligence can project itself. So when you are creating these kinds of things, you are engendering the candle to become the planetary gateway through the water, the fire, the air, and the earth of that aspect. So that way, when you use things of the Rite of Transformation, you are evoking these forces into the environment around you as you consume the ingredient blend and take them inside of yourself, so that you awaken the interior of your body as well as the exterior of your body. So your body becomes a holy temple. Your body becomes engendered with the same magic of your birth or your origin or your spirit, as well as the energy of the planets in relationship to that as they move through. So you can customize how that rite goes down and to what level of power you want to cultivate yourself. So you can do it one at a time. You could do 1 gate of Venus. You could do 1 gate of Mars. You could do 1 gate of the sun with the seal of the planet, with the energy of the talisman of that planet, right? And so with the use of the amulets, you're creating, or in this case, talismans, they are the gateways to those powers. So you are controlling it in order to release it in the space and in the moment for the ritual that you're requiring. Okay? And so that's how I get up into the use of those. The talismans themselves, or would be what I would carve into the candle, right? And then it would be the herbal powder around it, and then the flower-based circles, right? Why would I use flowers? Because it is something that has to be cultivated on purpose, and it has to be ground with purpose, and it has to be intermixed with the different herbs with purpose, right? It's not something that's done just by nature. Right? It's something that has to be created for a purpose. And so by creating it for a purpose, you're giving it application. You're creating the narrative in which it's formed. So using Greek magic, or the foundations of Greek magic, with the stuff like the Grimoire of Arts teaches on, right, is a foundational application that going through this allows you to, and then he goes into incredible depth on different types of amulets and, comparing the different numbers between what pages the gods are called on, what pages the amulets are used for. Like an amulet for fever is on page, the non-Roman PGM number 49, category A1, right? So against a amulet against fever is a PGM number 60. No, it would be 47. Yeah, section number 47, numbers 1 through 17. So again, I mean, sorry, my Roman numerals are a little bit old, out of habit of reading that. So you've got different applications for these things, and then you can get into the different types of talismans, right? There's the talismans that are general, there's the victories, there's the restraining anger talismans, there's the binding of coercion elements to it. But one of the things that we'll get into a little bit more is that the phylactery is the Greek word which is derived from phylacteros, or tikos, sorry, which means a safeguard or preservative. The Latin text, the word is usually rendered as phylacterium, Phylactery strips of papyrus or parchment, often black with white sheepskin, appear in a number of places, and they are almost specified at the end of the rite where the ritual equipment is listed separately. So these would be those ones that you can also stuff into your robes, as where the robes come together. You could put a phylactery and then the stitching of the garment closed for the ritual, and then you would cut the thread. Right? You could literally be stitched into your protective robes during certain rituals to keep your body from becoming issues, right? And so, like in Taoist magic, you want to use black robes to absorb the chi, so that way the chi that you're pulling in, right, doesn't get repelled using the white robes. So you don't want to use that principle with white robes in your work, because if you do, you'll wind up passing out. So, I mean, I've got white robes for like blessings and for purifications and stuff like that, but I would prefer using all black ones, right? It's like, I don't like those, and it becomes a matter of necessity. Do you need it to have no stitching? No, you need it to be plain, like as a corpse sheet. Like, would you be buried in that? Probably not. But you just white from the shoulders down, it's just a simple burial garment, right? You and the dead become as one. You look like a spirit, you act like a spirit, you do the things that are in reverence with the spirit, so that way you and the spirit bond, right? And so there is a type of magic discussed in here that I use that is a different course than what most modern magic gets into. And there's the Deficciones, the Catadesmos. Deficciones are the orders to the dead. They affect a particular desired magical result, and there is no English equivalent word. The theory behind them is that the spirits of the dead can be constrained by certain evocations and words on the defixio, Defixio, to carry out specific orders of the magician who created the defixio, or for the spirits of the dead to communicate with the daemons or the gods who can do so. The restless dead, especially the victims of murder or premature death, are thought to be constrained by the defixio to carry out the wishes of the magician. A desmos is a bond or a fetter, while the kata is down among other things. Is therefore not surprising that a catadesmos refers to the practice of binding nekudemonias down in the tomb. Pharaon states that catadesmos is derived from the verb catadeo, meaning to bind down. Given the importance of tomb culture in Egypt, defixiones have a long history of use there. Examples can be found in Greece and many colonies as far back to the 6th century BCE. And they may have been used as an Egyptian practice, having been attested to in the Old Kingdom, despite contention that they are of Greek origin. The practice was designed to utilize the dead to carry out instructions of the magician to the appropriate underworld god, typically chthonic ones, ones in the other world, right? Hermes, Ge, Hecate, Persephone, or the daemon itself to carry out. So if you're going to go and you're going to raise a spirit of a judge or a lawyer or a banker or a prostitute or one of those in the pauper's graves, if you need them to earn their way higher in the rankings of heaven, right? Or they need to be reborn. It's like those that die without family are different than those that are given higher orders, given an easier way of life. And so there's a heretic phrase for a tomb used in a way that is the noble mailbox of Osiris. So you can write letters to the dead and ask the dead to do things for you. And a very clear instruction on making a defixio has the full procedure using the defixio to secure love of a specific woman. And the specific sequence of the procedure is making clay images of both the magician and the woman of his desire, binding them with a lead plate, burying them near a grave, constraining the untimely dead occupants of the grave to carry out the magician's orders, invoking the Cthulhionic gods, taking back a remnant from the grave to establish a magical link back to the magician, and finally saying over this link another invocation, and the magician has thoroughly added 2 other versions of the Nomina Magica, right? The names of magic, the power. And so stuff like that goes into the forbidden rites of the 14th century book by Richard Kuykefer, where there is like the binding of the spirits of the dead, where you, for 7 days, you have a ring that's carved with 7 names. And on each day, you go to the grave and you pray to the tomb for each of these spirits to come through and bond to the ring. So that way, when you put the ring on a corpse for 7 days, it appears as it did as if it was alive. Or you can make a living person appear as they were dead for 7 days, right? So the application of the use of the dead in the relationship between the earth that receives the dead and the talismata and the sacred words, using the epic, using the mythology, using the thing, right, to make these occur, right? And so doing that, you could make a new shibeti, the little figures that you can make and bond to serve you, servitor spirits, right? Like later this week, tomorrow, I might make one and demonstrate how I would do it, right? Using the combination of the systems between the Grimoire of Arts and using this concept of bonding the dead with grave dirt and places of death, right? Or a place of a castle or a place of holy ground. So I can make one for holy purposes and I can make one for unholy purposes, right? And so by creating those, I would have the applications where I could put them in a box, and in that box, all I have to do is be like, all right, you for this purpose, you for this purpose. Now come forth and do my will, right? And what's really nice is that the prayer for that is in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And so for that, my copy is one of these enormous ones. This was a gift for my birthday one year. I really, really love it because it's got the full color plates. But the charge of causing a Shabbat to do work for a man in God's domain, right? And so, O Shabbat allotted to me, if I be summoned or if I be detailed to do any work which has to be done in God's domain, if indeed obstacles are implanted for you therewith, as a man at his duties, you shall detail yourself for me on every occasion of making arable fields, of flooding the banks, or conveying sand from east to west. Here I am, you shall say, right? And so the Ushabeti is the servitor designed to do the work for you in the other world. They're the ones that are designed to carry the sand to do the irrigation so that you can make your place in heaven. They're the ones that are designed they're basically the slaves of magic. They're the magical egregores, right? And you can use the dead, you can use the earth that receives the spirit, graveyard dirt. You don't have to use specific dirt from a specific grave. You can mix that into and have it contained within, and the whole thing becomes a talisman, right? Not an amulet. The talisman is specifically made for a purpose. This would be a talisman, right? It also becomes a defixio, right? Because of the fact that you're bonding a spirit to it in a looser sense. You're bonding the capacity of action to it. You're giving it prayers in order for it to function. And so when you think about Greek magic and you're thinking about the application of the narrative and you're thinking about the mythos of why it's important that the myths and the stations of the gods and all of those things become important, well, it's very simply because if you know how to use those under the right context, you can cause the similar or same things to sorts of happen. Allowing for and providing for the foundations, which give you that next level of development, right? They give you what it is you're trying to do. And so refining your terminology when it comes to magic is incredibly important because you understand that the ingredients that you use matter, that the application of those ingredients in a specific order causes a narrative. That narrative causes the effect that you desire. The time of day. We've talked about that. If you can create the planetary anchors, you don't have to be limited to the planetary time of day, because you know exactly where that energy is going to come from. You've created an amulet for it. You've created a totem for it, right? You've created that strip of power, like inside those scroll, there's a piece of parchment that has the seals on them for those particular planets in relation to the other planets that are associated with it. So every planet in its state, under its association for the days of the week, is accounted for. So that's a phylactery, right? And so it's a different thing than making a spell bottle, or a different thing from making a spell jar, which could be just an amulet or just could be a totem of purification, of protection, of these things. You can get really, really specific on how you cultivate these things based on your needs and your understanding of the terminology around the practices you're trying to embody. So understanding what it is you're trying to do is one of the more important things that you need to do when you're starting off. Otherwise, you're going to be, one author will say one thing, one person over here will say another thing, and Wiccan authors are terrible about knowing the difference because they don't go back and they don't reference wonderful authors like Dr. Stephen Skinner, right? Like all his excellent practices. And so going through and cultivating these kinds of relationships, going through and developing these kinds of understandings between the gods you're trying to work with, the intelligent energies you're trying to call forth, and the means by which you do so, right? And so tomorrow, like I said, I'll get the clay out and we'll actually make one, and it'll be made out of terracotta, and I'll prep and mix the dirt accordingly, using rainwater, using some dirt from monastery for holy ground, so that way it can do the holy tasks that I set it forth, right? So there's the different types of tasks that it can be set for, right? If you're dealing with grave from a pauper cemetery, it's funerary dirt. It's dirt that's supposed to be receiving the spirit of those that have to do these things, so you could press them into service, right, to do the things that you don't want to do. Or you can create it to do services in God's domain, which is the heavens, right? Depending on which heaven, depending on which God, depending on which planet, depending on which place. There are many. There's a lot. Okay. And so going through, you have these different applications. You have these different studies. All right. And it's like using the Complete Magician's Tables by Skinner or using Aleister Crowley's 777. Those are your two best books of reference, along with the PGM or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Like if you're trying to make some of this stuff go, right? You want to make prayer and you want to make offering and you want to be able to do this stuff right. And by right, I mean by the same ways that they did it in the ancient times. They had their reasons for doing it in the ancient times. Why? We have to look at folklore and what's been passed down as to why those things are used, why the herbs were used the way they were used, why they were made the way they were, right? Why is myrrh mixed with green powdered minerals and written on strips and placed upon the mummies in certain orders, right? Phylactery, protections. Spells for the dead. Spells for the living work the same, right? The same thing that they do to prepare the dead to the other world. They do, and you should be able to do, for modern day, right? You should be able to do these things for the modern day. You should be able to prepare the body to release the different spirits within it, to cultivate the relationship between that which is the earthly form, that which is the heavenly form, that which is the airy form. Right? And so that way you can understand that there's the manyfold aspects of the self and the soul that exist outside of the body, and that you can pull that into form. And by pulling it into form, you can give it life. And by giving it life, you're giving it a behavior, you're giving it a time in which to function, you're giving it an expression through which that can function, right? So you have your applications of necromancy. And then you have things like the egregores, like the DKMU, Alice Web Collective Network, right? And Trigag, or Zalti, or the Red Queen, or the White King. Scratch that, the Red King or the White Queen, right? And so you're doing different things using the foundations of our ancient systems, right? These are all built and recreations and developments for using ancient conjurations, using talismans for victory, using amulets for different types of things. Like, this entire book is specifically to help you work with the Greek magical papyri, right? Like this, to get this functional. And that's one of those things where you have to have multiple sources of information. Skinner's work is fantastic, but I also have other places of reference, like the cursed tablets and binding spells from the ancient world. I've got the Babylonian magic by King. I've got Magica Hera. Those are the things that you can use, and the faith applications of those, and to see what our ancestors were doing in that context. Because it's a liturgical tradition, they wrote it down. It's not a closed practice, right? Whereas other practices are where they didn't have writing, where they were more tribal, where they were oral tradition based, right? Whereas they weren't able to write down those secrets, right? And again, we talk about there's the mysteries, there is the religion, and then there's the magic. The magic and the religion are required, but the mysteries are integral. Those are the experiences of the individual that prove the religions to be viable and gives the magic as the tool by which that religion becomes viable. So I hope that today has helped in understanding a little bit of the applications of why I'm a very big proponent of making sure that your terminologies are specific, and the way in which you can approach liturgical magic studied linguistically or studied in texts like the PGM as comparative works that what we can use today. So that way our ancient stuff becomes modern, right? But it doesn't lose in translation. There is no loss of potential power. There is the way that they used to structure those invocations. If your hair stands on end when you're able to make these conjurations, congratulations, you're doing the magic, right? If you're looking for outside confirmation, like you're looking for a specific bird to show up, or if you're looking for a specific event to happen in accordance with your will, you've made the magic work. That's your manifestation, right? And so it's these things that come to pass that seemingly come to pass out of nowhere. And it's these things that we need to focus on as we study our Greek magic, as we apply the techniques of Greek magic. So that way we're not taking out of context those mythologies, but instead we're creating a narrative that allows for the gods to interact in the modern era in a positive way, in the same way they did in the ancient days. We have to be the ones that will carry forth that narrative in a way that makes it suitable for the communities which we serve, the clients that we take on, and the students that we adopt into the mysteries, right? And so those people that undergo the rite of transformation, they get to have that interaction of life-changing magic. The people that want to just call down the celestial forces or do the watchtower work so that they become part of the hierarchies, right? All of that's there. All of that's available for the individual. And it's how I did that in my early years, how I spent 10 years doing that. And that was 11 years ago. That was 10 years ago. This 2012 when I wrote that book. Now we got another 10 years, this stuff is going towards. So it'll be 20 years of practice in 2 books, right? When I get this new one done. And so I'm going through and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it that needs to be said? What supplemental information needs to be gone through as the 7-year course for the grade school gets built out, right? What foundational knowledge do you have to have before we can even have that conversation of the different types of operations for what is your year 1 studies, what is your year 2 studies, and why do you have 1 month dedicated specifically to one type of study, one type of study. It's like you can have a course that can cover 4 weeks of information that'll get you the working knowledge, but to have mastery over that takes years. And it takes the reapplication of it. And it takes needing to be able to see these things happen in different ways, that the outcome is consistent. And so if you can get your consistency done, if you can get your applications of these kinds of spiritual principles made in such a way that they are just tangible, they are just as important. So all of the people that are going to church, all of the priests that are professing their God or their spirits in whatever ways they're doing them, there is a mystery tradition that encompasses both the magic and the religion, that puts it one-to-one with the individual so that they know what they're talking about is true. That's the thing we have to recultivate in this society. That's what we have to. It's the mysteries that are only available to some. Why would you spend your life dedicated to something if it didn't work? Right? And that's why I have absolute respect for the bishops and stuff like that. I might not like what the words that they say because they're either homophobic or they're regressive or they're violent towards divergences. And it takes out of context a lot of opportunity for collaborative growth. Like if the Catholics could expand their worldview just a little bit, right? Every religion has been able to hide itself within the umbrella of Catholicism to some degree, right? But unless you have the conference of the power of the bishops, you can't use it. So that needs to change to some degree. Like there needs to be an opening of that system. And I don't know if I'm going to spend the time to go through and become a Catholic priest, but that might be an option later. But I don't know. I think that's just too much religion, too many Hail Marys. No. But it is also very literal. Grace is an energy. Hope is an energy. Those are energies. Those are behaviors. Those are angels. Those are spirits. Those are useful and beneficial things for man, right? Again, the services for a church, you do the weddings there, you do the funerals there, you do the baptisms there, you do the blessings and the consecrations there, right? The bigger the ceremony, the more it costs. The more candles that you use, right? The candles are blessed. The wax comes from bees that are grown on the land that's been consecrated, right? At least in the true fashions of the old monasteries, right? The monastery candles, those are expensive compared to like mass-produced things from China. Why? Because it comes from consecrated land, because it takes longer to make those. There's fewer of them that can be made. So as you go through and you create your practice, as you go through and you think about, well, where does this thing come from? Where is the history of what I'm calling on? Is it coming from the Greek? Is it coming from the Egyptian? Is it coming from the Aramaic? Is it coming from the Judaic? Is it coming from the Assyrian? Is it coming from the Quran? Is it coming from the Indian, the First Nations peoples? I'm talking about Indian, like yogis and stuff like that, or like the Hindu, or is it coming from like the Tibetan Buddhists, or is it coming from the Taoists, or is it coming from the Shinto religion, or all of these different things? They're all interwoven, but we have to be able to make sure that how they're interwoven and why we use those pieces of them are not outside of the narrative of what they're functional for. So you can take the stories and the mythos and you can make them happen again if they include the gods, right? So if it's a myth, all right, that means it's actually happened at some point in history. So you're calling that event that happened to happen again and to happen in the same response pattern as the divine. So when you think about the fiction books, when you think about works of fiction, right, like the narratives of the different types of the Bible, and it's thousands of different forms, and it's translation after translation after translation after its omissions, after the Apocrypha, after all of those, examinations of the text, under the right conditions, there can be a return of those narratives. So stay safe, my friends. I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for the spell of the day. I'm looking forward to it. Otherwise, have a wonderful night and stay safe. And remember, don't be evil. Have a good night, guys.